When Asgard Fell, A Tale of Loki's Triumph, Part 1. The throne of lies, the sky above New Midgard bled. Crimson and gold, colors that once symbolized hope now twisted into omens of despair. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her forehead against the cold glass of her laboratory window, watching the aurora that never ended, that had consumed the heavens for 3 years now since the fall. Since Thor lost, she remembered that day with crystalline clarity. The entire world had watched through every screen, every device, as the battle raged across the ruins of what was once Oslo. Thor, mighty and righteous, his hammer. Mjolnir crackling with lightning, facing his brother Loki. And what everyone believed would be the trickster god's final defeat. But Loki had learned, Loki had planned. The moment replayed endlessly in Sarah's nightmares. Thor raising Mjolnir for the killing blow, and Loki smiled that terribly. Knowing Smila's reality itself seemed to shudder, the illusions fell away like curtains, revealing the truth. Thor hadn't been fighting Loki. He'd been fighting a projection, a phantom, while the real Loki had been in Asgard, claiming the throne of Odin with the casket of ancient winters in one hand and the tesseract in the other. By the time Thor realized the deception, it was too late. Loki had already rewritten the fundamental laws governing the 9 realms. The Bifrost didn't just connect worlds anymore, it bled them together, merged them, corrupted them. Sarah turned from the window as her colleague, Dr. James Morrison, entered the lab. His face had aged a decade in 3 years, deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. They all looked like that now, the survivors in the resistance camps. The scanners picked up another incursion, James said quietly, his voice hoarse from years of breathing recycled air in the bunker. Sector 7. Same as last time. Sarah's blood ran cold. How many? 37 people. Gone. No bodies. No blood. Just ... vanished. That was Loki's cruelty made manifest. He didn't simply conquer Earth, he played with it. It twisted Italiano. Some days, gravity reversed itself in random locations. Other days, people would wake up to find their loved ones had never existed. Their memories the only proof of lives erased from reality itself. And then there were the taken people who simply disappeared, spirited away to whatever fate Loki deemed amusing. So Mikame Bach changed. We need to move the compound, Sarah said. If the pattern holds, we're in the next zone. James nodded grimly. They'd learned to read the signs, the way Loki's chaos followed certain rhythms. He was a god of mischief, after all, and even his madness had a terrible logic to it. Part 2. The Changed Ones. The evacuation began within the hour. 342 people, the remnants of what was once a thriving research facility, now reduced to scavengers and refugees in their own world. They moved through the underground tunnels. Old subway systems that Loki's reality warping had UN reached yet tore. Perhaps he simply found them too boring to corrupt. Sarah carried the sealed case containing their most precious resource. A fragment of Mjolnir, recovered from the battlefield where Thor fell. Not died they. Never found a body but fell from grace, from power, from hope itself. The fragment still hummed with residual energy, the last untainted piece of Asgardian magic they possessed. As they woke, Sarah noticed young Emma trailing behind, the 10-year-old girl who'd been born just before the fall. Emma had never known a normal sky, had never seen stars that didn't writhe and pulse with alien light. She'd never known a world where monsters weren't real. Dr. Chun, Emma whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. Is it true what they say? That Thor is still alive? Sarah wanted to lie, to give the child hope, but lies were Loki's domain, and she refused to traffic in his currency. I don't know, Emma. We haven't heard from any Asgardians since the fall. But people need to believe in something, so they tell stories. My mom says that if we're good enough, if we believe hard enough, Thor will come back and save us. Emma's eyes were too old for her face, filled with a desperate faith that broke Sarah's heart. Before Sarah could respond, the tunnel lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they shifted to a sickly green. Run! James screamed from the front of the column, but it was too late. The tunnel walls began to breathe, concrete and steel, transforming into something organic, something that pulsed with veins of emerald light. The temperature plummeted as frost spread across every surface, and Sarah heard the screaming start from the rear of the group. The Changed Ones had found them. They emerged from the walls themselves, figures that had once been human but were now twisted into Loki's image of dark humor. One woman's face had been replaced with a mirror that showed your worst fear. A man crawled on limbs that bent in too many directions, his laughter echoing with multiple voices. A child god? Help them. It was just a child whose eyes had been replaced with spinning portals to somewhere else. Somewhere that made you want to claw at your own vision to unsee it. The Changed Ones didn't kill. They transformed. They recruited. Sarah clutched Ema close, the Mjolnir fragment burning hot against her chest through the case. The creatures advanced, moving with an unnatural grace, and Sarah realized with horror that she recognized one of them. Dr. Patricia Valdez, who disappeared 3 months ago during a supply run. Patricia, Sarah breathed. Fight it, you're still in there. The thing that had been Patricia tilted its head at an impossible angle, frost forming in its hair. When it spoke, the voice was Loki's, emanating from its mouth like a grotesque ventriloquist act. Still in here, my dear Dr. Chen. She was never more herself than now. I've simply removed the limitations of her tedious humanity. She sees the truth, now that I am order. I am peace. I am the only god this realm will ever need. The case containing the Mjolnir fragment suddenly erupted with golden light, and the Changed Ones recoiled, shrieking. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Emma and ran, following James and the others as they scattered into the branching tunnels. Behind them, Patricia Thing's laughter echoed, still carrying Loki's voice. Run, little mortals. Run and hide. It makes the game so much more entertaining. Part 3. The last temple, they lost 43 people in the tunnel collapse. Whether Loki had deliberately allowed some to escape or simply grown bored, Sarah didn't know. Perhaps there was no difference. The survivors emerged in what had once been Brooklyn, though the skyline was unrecognizable now. Buildings twisted into impossible geometries. Streets ran vertical, and the East River flowed upward into the bleeding sky before dispersing into steam. This was New Midgard, Loki's masterpiece of chaos. There, James pointed to a structure that seemed stable, an old cathedral that somehow remained intact amid the madness. We can regroup there. As they approached, Sarah realized why the cathedral had been spared. The doors bore Loki's mark, a sneering face carved into the wood, eyes that seemed to follow their movement. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a message. They entered anyway. They had nowhere else to go. Inside, the pews had been arranged in a circle around a central altar, upon which sat a projection, not a hologram, but a real projection of Loki himself, sitting on the throne of Asgard, looking down at them with amusement. Welcome, my wayward flock. The projection spoke, his voice reverberating through the cathedral. I have been waiting for you, specifically for you, Dr. Chen. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What do you want? Want? I have everything I want. Thor is broken, cast into the void between realms where even death cannot find him. Asgard bows to me. The 9 realms are mine to shape as I please. But you ... He leaned forward, his smile sharp as a blade. You carry something of my dear brother's. A fragment of his precious hammer. And more importantly, you carry hope. He spoke the last word like a curse. Hope is the most insidious poison. Loki continued, rising from his throne. The projection moved as if he were truly there, pacing around them in the circle of pews. It makes mortals do such wonderfully stupid things. So here's my gift to you, Dr. Chen. A choice which is more than most receive. The Mjolnir fragment grew hot again, burning through the case, through her shirt, searing her skin. Sarah gasped, but refused to let it go. Destroy the fragment, Loki said. Cast away this last vestige of Thor's power. Accept that I am your king, now and forever, and I will spare everyone in this cathedral. You can live out your days in the enclaves I've created for the obedient, never wanting for food or shelter. Or ... double quotes. He paused, savoring the moment. Or, keep your hope. Clutch that fragment tight, and believe in the lie that Thor will return. And I will allow you to leave this place unharmed, to continue your pitiful resistance. But cenotes. Every person who dies in my hunts from this day forward, every soul I will make into something new, every child who weeps for a world they'll never know, their blood will be on your hands, because you chose hope over mercy. The weight of the choice crushed down on Sarah. She looked around at the faces of the survived, terrified, barely human anymore in their desperation. She saw Emma, still clutching her hand, looking up with those two old eyes. There is a third option. A voice called out from the shadows at the back of the cathedral. Everyone turned. A figure emerged, wrapped in tattered cloaks, moving with a limp. As he drew closer, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. It was Thor. But not the Thor the world had known. This Thor was broken, scarred, his face marked with burns, and his eyes haunted by something terrible. He carried no hammer, wore no armor, just rags and wounds. But when he looked at Loki's projection, there was still defiance in his gaze. "Hello, brother," Thor said, his voice rough as gravel. "I've come home." Part 4. The God Who Fell. Loki's projection flickered, the god's composure cracking for just a moment's surprise, then delight, then something darker spreading across his features. "Thor," Loki purred, his smile widening. "I should have known you'd survive the void. You always were too stubborn to die properly. Tell me, how many years did you spend drifting in that darkness? How many centuries passed while you screamed into nothing?" Thor took another step forward, and Sarah could see now that he was barely standing. Whatever he'd endured had hollowed him out, left him a shell of the god he'd been. "Time has no meaning in the void," Thor said. "But pain does, and I learned something there, Loki. In all that endless suffering, I learned what you already knew. Oh, and what's that? That we were both playing the wrong game." Thor's eyes swept across the terrified faces of the survivors. "I tried to protect them with strength, with power, with righteousness. But you... ... You understood that mortals don't need protection. They need a villain to unite them. A monster to fight. You gave them purpose through suffering." Sarah's stomach dropped. No. This couldn't be what Thor had become. Loki leaned forward on his throne, intrigued. "Go on. Join me," Thor said, and the cathedral fell into shocked silence. "Rule together, as we should have from the beginning. Two brothers, two gods, bringing order to chaos. You've had your fun, Loki. You've proven your point, but this... ... He gestured at the twisted world beyond the cathedral walls. "This isn't sustainable. Eventually, you'll run out of toys to break." For a long moment, Loki said nothing. Then he began to laugh, a sound that started as a chuckle and built into hysterical amusement that shook the very foundations of the cathedral. "Oh, Thor," Loki gasped between laughs. "You magnificent fool. You actually think I'd fall for that? You think? I don't know desperation when I see it. You crawled out of the void with nothing, no hammer, no power, no army, and you thought you could trick the god of trickery?" Thor's face remained impassive, but Sarah saw his hand tremble. "You're not here to join me," Loki continued, his voice turning cold. "You're here because you finally understand that you can't beat me. You're here to beg. So go ahead, brother. Beg. Get on your knees before these mortals and beg me to stop." The silence stretched like a blade. Then Thor did something Sarah didn't expect. He smiled. It was a broken, terrible smile, but genuine. "You're right," Thor said. "I can't beat you. I have no power left. But that's not why I'm here." He turned to Sarah, his eyes locking onto the case she carried. "Te? Fragment. Hibahit. Tomadont." Loki's projection hissed, standing abruptly from his throne. "That fragment is all you have left of hope. If you give it to him, give it to me," Thor repeated, extending his scarred hand. "Trust me." One last time, Sarah looked at the fragment, then at Thor, then at Emma, clinging to her side. In the god's ruined face, she saw something she'd thought extinct. Not hope, but something deeper. Conviction. She placed the case in Thor's hand. The moment Thor's fingers closed around Mjolnir's fragment, his body convulsed. Lightning, real lightning, not Loki's illusions, erupted from the shard. But instead of empowering Thor, it consumed him. His flesh began to burn away, disintegrating into golden motes of light. "What are you doing?" Loki's projection shouted, actually stepping forward, fear creeping into his voice for the first time. "What I should have done from the beginning," Thor gasped as his body dissolved. "I'm not trying to beat you, Loki. I'm removing myself from the game. You won because you needed me as a villain, as the righteous fool you could define yourself against. But if I'm gone truly, permanently gone, you lose your meaning too." Sarah understood then. Loki had kept Thor alive, cast him into the void instead of killing him, because he needed his brother. Needed the dynamic, the conflict, the story. Without Thor, Loki was just a tyrant on a throne with no one to prove himself against. "No!" Loki snarled. "No, you can't. The fragment carries my essence," Thor continued, his legs now completely gone, his torso fading. "When I'm gone, it will return to Mjolnir's resting place, and with it, the spell you cast will begin to unravel. Not quickly, it will take years, maybe decades, but without me to oppose you, without me to define yourself against, you'll find that ruling isn't as entertaining as conquering. I'll just make another Thor." Loki screamed, his composure completely shattered. "I'll create 1,000 heroes for me to defeat. They won't be real," Thor whispered. "Not just a head and shoulders floating in light. And you'll know it. That's the curse of the trickster, brother. You can deceive everyone but yourself. Goodbye, Loki. I loved you. That was always your greatest weapon against me." And then Thor was gone. The fragment clattered to the floor, now just a piece of metal, inert and powerless. Loki's projection flickered wildly, the god's face cycling through rage, grief, and something that might have been despair, before finally stabilizing into an expression of cold fury. "You've won nothing," Loki said, his voice deadly quiet. "The spells will take decades to fade. You'll all be dead long before Earth returns to normal. Thor has sentenced you to a slow death, not salvation." But Sarah saw the truth in Loki's eyes. He was already bored, already lost without his brother to play against. "Maybe," Sarah said, picking up the dead fragment. "But we have something now that we didn't have before. We have an ending. This won't last forever, and that's more hope than we had an hour ago." Loki's projection stared at her for a long moment, then laughed a hollow, joyless sound. "Enjoy your hope, Dr. Chen. I'll see you in 40 years, when you're old and gray, and Earth is still my playground." The projection began to fade, if I haven't grown bored and destroyed it all by then. And he was gone. Epilogue. The long game that was 27 years ago. Dr. Sarah Chen, now 73 years old, stood on the balcony of New Hope Station, one of the surviving human enclaves. Emma stood beside her, no longer a child but a woman of 37, leading the resistance that Sarah had once headed. The sky was still wrong, still bleeding those colors, still pulsing with alien light. But it was less intense than before. The changed ones still existed, but they were fewer now, and some had begun to remember who they'd been. The laws of physics still bent and twisted, but with decreasing frequency. Loki rarely appeared anymore. When he did, it was with the air of someone going through the motions. The cruelty was still there, but the enthusiasm had died. He was a god playing a game by himself, and everyone could see he was bored. "Do you think we'll see it?" Emma asked, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. A normal Earth? Sarah thought about Thor's sacrifice, about the slow unraveling of Loki's spells. She thought about the fragment they'd buried in the place where Thor had dissolved. Now, a memorial and a promise. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But your child might, or your grandchild." "Thor gave us time, Emma. He gave us a future, even if it's a long, painful one. Was it worth it?" Emma asked quietly. All this suffering, just so Loki would eventually get bored. Sarah considered the question, watching the twisted skyline of New Midgard, thinking of all the people lost, all the horrors endured. Thor understood something in the void. Sarah finally said, "You can't beat some monsters, you can only outlast them." Loki won the battle, but Thor ensured he'd lose the war by removing the one thing that gave his victory meaning. Far above, in a palace made of lies and illusions, Loki sat on his throne, staring at an empty seat beside him where Thor should have been. The god of mischief had everything he'd ever wanted, and he'd never been more miserable. But on Earth below, in the resistance camps and survivor enclaves, children were being born who would never know Thor's name. Children who would grow up in a slowly healing world, who would eventually reclaim their planet through nothing more than persistence and time. That, Sarah thought, was the most fitting revenge against the god of mischief, making his greatest victory feel like defeat through sheer, stubborn survival. The horror wasn't in the darkness of Loki's triumph. The horror was in the slow, excruciating wait for the light to return, and in knowing that some who waited would never see the dawn.